to say I told her so. But you know what? I told her so. I fucking told her so.
All right, fellas. I have a question, a very important question for you. What is the classiest way to show support for a politician that you like? What's the classiest way you can do that without humiliating yourself publicly?
Photoshop yourself into photos where you're shaking hands and being friends with them and put it on the timeline. We're like, pleased to spend time with my good friend, Joe Biden.
Yeah. I would say, I would say you should always drop like big things coming and suggest that they're going to make you they're going to give you some kind of position of authority, and then write a long notes app note when that eventually doesn't materialize, and then call them treacherous and suggest you're going to leave them in your wake.
Okay, those are both pretty good, but the correct answer is posting feet. If you want to support a politician and you like the cut of their jib, what you got to do is you got to go online and you have to post as many feet pics as possible. I
think you should do that for different parties. That you should have done that for like the Libertarian Party. There should be a specific feet pic you can post to say that you like Jason Kenney. If you're really into BC NDP in particular, you should do something with a toe that everyone knows. This is a foot pic in support of old growth logging.
Yeah, just post those big hippie hobbit toes. Big hairy toes. Come on, let's go.
This is what the Athenians had in mind with direct democracy, was democracy of feet pics.
That's right. So I'm talking about this mainly because the weirdest thing happened on Canadian Twitter a couple of days ago. Basically, there was a National Post article by Sabrina Badeau criticizing Chrystia Freeland, friend of the podcast, for taking her shoes off during a meeting. And that prompted a wave of liberal wine moms posting pictures of their feet, with hashtags like "feet out for Freeland" or "solidarity in action." or
This is like that Nickelodeon guy, Dan Schneider, who got all those kids to send photos of their feet when he was just like, hey, if you like the show, just everyone use the hashtag, with this, and then put jelly on your feet and take pictures of it.
That's pretty much it.
I think the lady who wrote that article is a sicko. She was just trying to trap people into sending her feet pics.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
I think Americans would be wise to this kind. I don't think Americans would let this happen to them, or American children might, but I don't think American adults would let this happen to them. I think Canadians are much more feckless and easy to trick.
No, and these people were warned too. When the first foot pic went up with the hashtag barefoot and awesome.
I mean, we've had the barefoot is legal movement here in America for a while, but I think because of that, people are educated to the fact that all feet people are sickos and that you should keep your little piggies off anything related to social media.
Yeah, keep that shit wrapped up. I mean, so people were basically responding on the timeline, being very nice, saying, "Hey, maybe don't post pictures of your bare feet on the internet. I'm just saying, I can't tell you why, but just don't do it." And the response was basically you can't shut us down. We are strong. We support our strong girl boss prime minister. It was just fucking amazing.
It's basically like someone going to, I don't know, invest in purchasing the Brooklyn Bridge or place an investment with Ponzi. You being like, no, you really have to not do this. You are doing something you do not fully understand. And being like, no, how dare you stand in the way of my future success? Out of my way. I'm off to post feet.
Check out these piggies, baby.
Ooh, triggered, are you? Triggered, you conservatives who hate a girl boss?
One of the
solidarity.
Yeah. One of the biggest boosters too of this short-lived movement had a clothing line, or has a clothing line rather, called Madam Premier. And I kind of went through their available stock, and one of the most cursed things they have is Hillary Clinton socks, where Hillary looks kind of like kind of like a cross between the existing Hillary Clinton we know and love and like a mutant frog. But then they're on socks, so you put them on their feet and the face kind of distorts even more. It's just cursed, absolutely
it's all
cursed.
Stretched
shit.
out, yeah.
I mean, that's what they do before they actually wheel her out to give a speech. Is they have to be like, oh shit, we got to get the scaffolding and the kid juice in there, or else she's gonna look like the melted frog.
That's right.
But I find it depressing that our strange Renfield like sort of liberals who become dedicated to like one of these senior political figures, we couldn't even commit to making an awful mutant sock out of our own girl boss. We needed to import an American one.
Yeah, that's
they
pretty
weren't
telling.
confident enough in our Canadianness. Yeah, come on, Madam Premier. We have enough like awful girl bosses in Canada. You don't need to make socks of Hillary.
That's true. But okay, talking about Hillary and talking about big beautiful feet isn't the reason we have our guest on today. Of course, it's live from New York. Will Menaker, host of Chapo Trap House and Film Lover. Hello, Will.
Cheers, everybody. Always a joy to be hanging out with my friends north of the border.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and wouldn't you know it, you guys up there like movies too.
Yeah, we
got
even
a few
make
of your
one or
own.
two.
We even make
you
some.
may
of them.
even have seen some fantastic Canadian films, such as The Incredible Hulk, starring Edward Norton, a wonderful gem of Canadian cinema. You may have seen also, I believe, some of the establishing shots of Home Alone were also a gem of Canadian cinema. And the list goes on.
Yeah, location footage for The X-Files, stuff like that.
So most American TV shows. Rumble in the Bronx, one of the most credible New York films ever made, was I mean, it wasn't all filmed in the Bronx. There was a little bit of it that was in Vancouver, but they accurately rendered the culture and spirit of New York City and the Bronx so well that I'm gonna let it pass.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to talk about an incredible time in Canadian film. It was a time when Canada kind of single-handedly invented the North American slasher genre. We saw the rise of the King, David Cronenberg, and dentists, businessmen, and doctors were funding everything from Death Wish knockoffs to stuff like Porky's, and what we're going to talk about is the history of Canadian tax shelter film. So, the beginning of film in Canada, it really starts with the National Film Board being created in 1939. And this was partially to produce propaganda in support of the Second World War, and partially to create a domestic film industry. By 1950, the National Film Act gives the National Film Board the mandate to interpret Canada to Canadians and other nations. That's their mandate. So,
I mean, that's sort of when you think about kind of what ended up happening. Spoiler alert! With the what became of the Canadian film industry, it's a little bit sort of, slightly depressing, but also a little bit accurate, given that we essentially became a backlot, sort of like a commodity provider for American cultural production.
Yeah.
What we ended up doing.
I mean, at least certainly in the film that I watched for today, I mean, it's just like we're going to interpret Canada for Canadians by making movies about America, or just movies for Americans that are set in vaguely North American settings that they could easily mistake for being just a city that they're not familiar with.
The most Canadian thing I think that exists in the film Scanners is that if you notice, the defense contractor Consec is always talking about how they have a variety of clients throughout North America, and only Canadians say North America.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Other than that, it might as well. Other than that, and like the fact that it's we'll get to this. All obviously sort of shot in Montreal. It almost might as well be an American movie. Yeah, and I mean, as we sort of go on, that is we had this. I'll get to my big sum up. Dan and I have been talking about this a lot. I want to save my big sum up points.
Well,
it is interesting that our. Oh, go ahead.
I got to add too. There's another big tell in Scanners, which is in the opening scene. There's very clearly an ad for what Americans would identify as a corn dog, but it says pogo, which is the Quebecois nomenclature for corn dog.
Another big tell that that Scanners is a Canadian movie is letting Stephen Lack be the leading man in a movie.
Yes.
Just letting a guy that boring sort of like anchor a big movie like Scanners is, that's a good Canadian little bit of Canadian culture there.
Oh yeah, so I was gonna say I'm gonna bring us up to Scanners with just a quick history of like how we got there, how we got to this incredible performance by Michael Ironsides, and like in the late 1950s, the National Film Board actually does some really good work. They produce really good cinema verite documentaries. They have a series called Candid Eye, which is totally worth checking out. And they also fund Larry Kent, who makes these amazing counterculture films like Bitter Ash and a film called High from 1967. So they have all this as like cultural product, but then there's this obvious deficit of what you would call popular cinema, stuff that you could go see at your local theater. And that problem is solved by a company called Cinepix, which would later go on to become Lionsgate. They released, I think, Buffalo 66, stuff like that. But in the beginning, Cinepix was just a collection of theaters owned by John Dunning's father in Montreal. John Dunning's father passes away. He inherits this chain of theaters, and he brings on a man named Andre Link as a business advisor, whose first order of business is to realize that they, quote, can't really do any worse than the films that we have been importing from Europe. So they they were importing like extremely low budget softcore sleaze from
what I feel like they were doing is they were importing the films that they watch in Seinfeld.
Yes.
They were importing Rochelle.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it, Riley. Like, yeah. So they were importing like whatever, the Yugoslavian version of Rochelle, like the,
we've got prognosis
W
negative.
Mysteries of the Organism wasn't packing them in theaters all over Montreal.
They're importing Jocic and yeah, so they decide, fuck this, we're going to make our own movie. And they make a movie called Valerie, which is a breezy softcore movie about a sex worker. Very low budget. But the brilliant thing that they do is they come up with a marketing scheme for it that is targeted.
An extended universe like Avengers.
Yes. And their marketing scheme is to tune in with the political landscape in Quebec at the time. And Valerie, the main character, is presented as the province of Quebec. Valerie is selling her body, just like Quebec is selling itself to the maudit anglais, the damned English. And it works. The film is a smash success. Dunning and Link go on to fund a movie called Death Weekend. They fund Shivers and 70 or 80 other films. But the way that they do this is they use this tax shelter scheme. And the tax shelter.
Can I, Dan, before you go on, can I tell you something about Death Weekend?
Yeah, please.
Did you know that Death Weekend was illegal in the UK?
Oh, is it part of the whole video?
Oh, was it one of the video nasties?
It was one of the video nasties. That's right. It was fully illegal to watch to enjoy some of Canada's finest cultural production in the UK for much of the middle of the 20th century.
I think like My Bloody Valentine, which we'll talk about a little later, like briefly, also was on that list. I think a lot of these Canadian films ended up on the video nasty list.
Yeah, because the UK is a country that hates fun.
That's right. Why?
Way to support the Commonwealth, United Kingdom.
To be fair, that's around when they were starting to flirt with their satanic project of European integration. So I expect fully that we'll finally get Death Weekend back over here on British shores soon, and it will be it will still contain the best looking people in this entire place.
Like, I would argue that the films that the UK were producing at the same time were just as disturbing as Death Weekend. Like, I don't know if anyone's seen Abigail's Party or like Nuts and any of the early Mike Leigh shit. Those are horror movies. Like,
and the Meantime and Threads. That makes a cheery double feature.
Yeah, totally. Or what is it? Scrubs? Wasn't there a film called Scrubs about like a boys' prison as well? I mean, come on. Yeah.
That's just actually what happens in every school here.
That's a documentary, man.
So the tax shelter, we can thank tax lawyer Don Johnson for this golden age of Canadian film. He was working out of Montreal in the 1960s, and he made a discovery that would basically changed the course of the film industry here. He was putting together the financing for a Paul Ullman film called Act of the Heart, which I looked up, and it's another Seinfeld-ass film name. But it's a clergy-themed pot boiler set in Quebec, starring a young and handsome Donald Sutherland. And it is. I watched a couple minutes of it, and man, is it bad. But Johnson realized that Canada's tax rules included these little-used provisions that allowed investors to claim a 60% capital cost allowance deduction for funding qualifying film productions. So what this means is for every dollar...
So, wait, Dan.
Yeah.
Are you saying that we had a producer's law? We had the producer's law.
Yeah,
yes.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. Yes,
okay.
This is the producer's clause. So for every dollar an investor puts into a qualifying film, they could reduce their taxable income by 60 cents, lowering their overall tax bill. So it would take a few years for people to catch on to this and for people to start widely exploiting it. But in 1974, the CCA got bumped up to 100%. So that meant you could write off the entire cost of a film. And at the same time this is going on, the Canadian government creates the Canadian Film Development Corporation, which is a crown company that provides funds to local filmmakers to help them get their movies off the ground. So you've got what Scanners producer Pierre David calls the money tree. So it's a mix of private and public funds waiting to be plucked. And on one side, you're submitting arts grant applications, and on the other side, and this is from David as well, you're, quote, pitching a room full of dentists, businessmen, and lawyers who want to save on their taxes.
I mean, this does sound like actually like the perfect model for cultural production, because I think honestly, like, just funding exploitation films should be one of the only ways that you can shelter your assets from taxes.
Yeah.
I totally agree.
Because it's a genuine social good.
Yeah.
But also, right, like if you think about sort of, okay, well, there was this sort of gigantic sort of pool of public money and these sort of public incentives to dump sort of anyone who was earning over, like, I don't know, $30,000 a year or whatever, to just like dump a bunch of money into the production of whatever.
Yeah, but that democratizes the role of being a movie producer. You know, like, it shouldn't just be for fucking like the ultra wealthy and Hollywood sickos. It should be some dentists from Quebec or Ontario or whatever.
Everyone deserves to be Don Simpson for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like you won't have access to Don Simpson's level of cocaine, but you'll get some pretty good blow.
Yeah, like look, but you're still not trafficking. You're not still like trafficking in weight, but you can still get ounces, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But also, like, this, I mean, the fact is also, like, if the more kind of, the incentive here is to spend money on cultural production just because of some, like, crazy tax rule, but the incentive is still to, like, just get the money out. We don't really care about what happens when it gets made, which bizarrely gives directors just so much more freedom.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's, like, if it makes money.
Yeah, and the types of movies that get made. So, I picked a couple very successful examples of this system.
Yeah.
So, the first one I thought of immediately was Black Christmas, which is a 1974 like proto slasher film starring Olivia Hussey, Margot Kidder, and John Saxon, and it's about a group of sorority sisters stalked and murdered by an obscene phone caller on Christmas. Clark would go on to make A Christmas Story, which is kind of the polar opposite of Black Christmas. Same subject matter, but for kids.
It's actually not. It's actually a very dark movie.
It actually is. Yeah, that's true. He also made Porky's, Baby Geniuses, and something recently with Jon Voight in it called Karate Dog, which I have not seen.
See, that's what happens. We lost like these sort of unusual tax incentives to make just like whatever dog, and now all of our most sort of genius producers of insane movies are just making like something that gets sold in like a Dollar General starring Jon Voight.
It's pretty much exactly.
Jon Voight plays Jon Voight plays the sort of the neighborhood liberal, sort of a block association president who wants to euthanize the karate dog for chopping too many children.
We got to do something about this karate dog.
He chose the movie because it's personal to him. He read a Dinesh D'Souza book about karate dogs, and he felt compelled to be in a movie about them.
Guys, I got a pandemic karate dog, and it beat me in the kumite, and I had it put down, and I'm very sad about it.
Also, it stars Chevy Chase as the voice of the karate dog. I expect that those lines are delivered with passion in a studio and not just like in a cell phone from a cell phone with traffic noises in the background. My.
So yeah, I mean, Black Christmas, seminal slasher movie, and made a shitload of money because it was, it was put together on a pretty low budget. And on the same tip, you get George Mihalka's My Bloody Valentine, and Mihalka's like an interesting case in this tax shelter milieu too, because he came out of the political and experimental film scene. Like what he was working on before this slasher movie that he made was he was living with unhoused people in Montreal for 3 months, basically documenting their lives. He's and during the tax shelter era, so he was approached and he was basically like, "Oh, I can make a movie. It has to be a genre pick, but I can make like a political movie about the abandonment of the working class in Nova Scotia. It's just going to have to be a slasher film." And that's exactly what he did. So he made My Bloody Valentine. You also have Prom Night, another like seminal horror film. Oliver Stone makes his first movie under the tax shelter system, a movie called Seizure. And then, one of the biggest successes, of course, is Ivan Reitman, who produces Meatballs, Porky's, Shivers, goes on to make Ghostbusters, and also produces one of the two films that we all decided to watch for this episode. So, well, and Will, I want to say, Will, this was I gave you like 4 or 5 films. This was your choice. Blackout, 1978. Yeah. Can you walk us through the basic outline of this product of the tax shelter film era?
Well, I got to say, first and foremost, as the official New Yorker on the show today, I would like to say that Blackout is a surprisingly very credible New York City film. A good chunk of it is actually filmed in New York City, and I think it definitely does capture the New York of the 70s. Obviously, I wasn't alive to it, but the fact that every civil servant portrayed in this film has horseshoe padding baldness, is sweating profusely, and is chewing on an unlit cigar in every scene with them, I thought was very credible. It reminded me a lot of Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. It's a strange movie. It's sort of it's a combination of sort of like black comedic social satire, and then like a sort of disaster thriller, and then a very sleazy grindhouse like exploitation, like torture, rape, revenge film. There's a lot of stuff going on in it. It stars Robert Mitchum's fail son, Jim Mitchum, in one of the most leaden performances I think I've ever seen. But
low energy.
His utter his absolutely low energy, affectless, just sort of like wandering in and out of scenes, just sort of like confused, not really knowing what's going on. That is offset by a very lively, villainous performance by the great Robert Carradine in, I think, the film he did right before he became famous in Revenge of the Nerds.
That's right.
He is indeed playing a nerd in this movie, but he's playing a scary nerd. He's playing a nerd with swag in this movie, which I appreciated. Of the great Carradine family.
Well, he's playing a nerd with swag who loves to critique capitalism and terrorize the rich.
That's right.
No, he is explicitly a left-wing domestic terrorist who has been waging a bombing campaign against corporate America, but also believes that the sick and weak have no business living in society. So His political beliefs are a little confused. It was released in 1978. That's 2 years after the famous The Bronx is Burning incident and the big blackout that led New York to descend into near anarchy and looting and things of that nature. So the movie is very much a kind of urban exploitation film. But I got to say, it really did. It reminded me a lot of Cronenberg's first movie, Shivers, because most of it takes place in a fairly upscale apartment building. And what I thought was interesting about this movie from a Canadian perspective is, unlike American like urban anarchy movies of a similar era, which tend to focus on like the dregs of society and take place in like, squalid, bombed out neighborhoods in the Bronx or just like, the urban poor. This movie is very much about like the similar to Shivers, is about like the introduction of sort of foreign agents that precipitate a total breakdown in like the social order and within just this sort of hermetically sealed universe of a fairly upscale Upper East Side apartment building. And to that end, because when I was going into the movie, I was expecting a much more of like a Death Wish sort of movie where it's just very much about like, poverty and like the scary urban criminals and just like the streets of just like muggings and, just disastrous nightmare urban anarchy. But like this movie introduces that concept to a very kind of like polished middle class to upper middle class milieu that I enjoyed. It's basically about, basically a blackout happens in New York City. A blackout happens as sort of similar to like a sort of a mini Con Air. Mm-hmm. You've got 4 or 5 sort of uniquely sadistic and evil criminals being transported via paddy wagon to Rikers Island or criminal processing or something like that. They're being transferred and then like they're able to escape in the middle of a blackout, and they make their way to this apartment building and proceed to terrorize the residents of this building for a night of horror. But the one thing they are not planning on is police officer Jim Mitchum.
Yeah, the man who just by their bad luck happened to have a bout of somnambulism and sleepwalked into the crime scene, where he began desultorily punching them occasionally.
He accidentally stops them from doing crimes like several times in this movie, like through no deductive work of his own, just like blunders into an apartment where they're terrorizing someone. It's incredible.
And then the moment, what I also enjoy, like the moment that he that like one of the criminals sort of gets access to him, he immediately is tied up on a couch.
Yep. Like, so yeah, it's like you got this like I said, like this Con Air style all-star team of criminals, including the previously mentioned Robert Carradine, who's sort of the brains of the operation, is the left-wing terrorist who's like, when they're fucking with each other in the back of the paddy wagon, he's just like, why don't you direct your anger and violence towards the real enemy? They're sitting up there. I'm talking about the cops, folks.
Yeah, don't punch. He's telling them not to punch down.
Our evil capitalist society.
It's like, it's like you're punching down.
In some ways, he was the first Bernie bro.
Yeah, and then he's like, hey, well, here's this nice apartment building. Let's just rob all these people and take their money in a nice car so we can, make a quick getaway during this blackout. Then you got sort of the muscle muscle of the gang, who's sort of the least sketched out character, but he's able to punch down locked doors. Then there's a firebug arsonist character who's sort of the wild card.
Kopech.
And by wild card, I mean he's clearly French Canadian or something like that. I don't know.
He's played by Don Granberry, and like his character is so fucking repellent. He's so good at doing this character.
He's awful.
He's also in Death Weekend in a pretty much identical role. Like it's not quite as coded as this role, you know. But
that's weird because he's like a sort of he's a guy that just sort of like looks like a guy with long hair. Like I feel I don't know how he sort of found himself being sort of typecast as like the sort of chortling psychopath.
I just as an aside, as my hair grows longer and longer during the pandemic, every now and then I'll look at myself in the mirror and think like I'm becoming this type of guy, like in looks, I'm becoming like the hitchhiker in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I'm becoming a Kopech, like.
Yeah. Same, Dan. And then, of course, rounding out this all-star criminal lineup, you have the guy whose only crime that he likes committing is rape. And you better believe there's a long scene of him doing just exactly that in this movie.
Very unpleasant.
So it's like, there's a lot of... It's very unpleasant. There's a lot of wild, like, sort of tonal shifts in this movie. This one has got to be the hardest of them. And when I was... Just looking for stuff to read about this movie, I saw someone's plot summary of this movie, and they were describing the characters, and then they were like, it also features Belinda Montgomery, who you may remember as Don Johnson's ex-girlfriend from Miami Vice. Here, she's as beautiful as always. And like her character in this movie is just rape victim.
Yes.
There's not much else to that character going on here.
And if you want to talk about tonal shifts, like what happens is these like brutal, sadistic crimes intercut with a Greek wedding that appears to be just sort of, carrying on despite the blackout.
A giant Greek wedding is going on in this apartment building featuring character. Only comic relief was invited to this wedding. And I don't know if you guys clocked this, but the groom at the Greek wedding has one of the most dramatic unibrows I have ever seen.
Yes.
Ever. Yeah. And then he wasn't the only one. There was an entire wedding party of guys with unibrows, but the guy getting married is sort of it's Greek custom that like if you have the strongest band of hair on your head, then you get to choose your wife.
Well, it's
like a wolf pack thing.
So like I had a strange reaction watching all the Greek wedding scenes because my wife is Macedonian, and once they introduced it as a Greek wedding, as the criminals got closer and closer to the Greek wedding, I started sympathizing with them. And I was like, yeah, let's go. Let's fucking go. Let's take back Thessaloniki. Let's do it.
Also, I should also mention that another resident of the apartment building, another victim of this crime gang's evil blackout crimes, is, of course, played by the great Ray Milland, who you may remember from such films as Billy Wilder's The Lost Weekend and X, the man with X-ray eyes. But there's a little bit of sort of like...
And what is it? That thing with two heads as well.
Yeah.
Too, right?
But like, there's a little bit of sort of like I don't know, class black comedy going on here because he's the rich asshole of the building, and like I said, it is very like Shivers or High Rise in that like the further up the staircase they get, the richer and more asshole-ish their victims get, and like this guy is basically willing to have his wife be killed in front of him, but then when they threaten to burn his art collection, he coughs up the number to his safe immediately. They're like, we're going to kill your wife if you don't give us the combo to the safe. And she's like, please, I'm not as strong as you. Just tell them the code. And he's like, honey, you have to learn to be strong. You can't negotiate with terrorists. It'll never end.
Yeah, we don't negotiate with terrorists. Stiff upper lip. Yeah.
A wife replaceable. Buy $15,000. No, thank you.
Yeah.
And this guy, they caught him lacking too in like a funny way because like when they burst into his apartment, he already has a handgun pointed at the door. But then Robert Carradine's character's like, "Hey, if you shoot me now, I'm like gonna shoot your wife," and he doesn't even have the gun trained on him. Like this guy sort of started blasting as soon as they walked in the door. But he folds like a fucking card table and then has his art collection burned in front of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course Jim Mitchum just sort of ambles into the room with a fire extinguisher.
What's going on here? Is it fire or something? All right.
Yeah, whatever. I guess I'll just use that. And it's, again, like 2 minutes of just him gamely putting out every element of the
just
fire.
fucking stumbling around the apartment, stuff like lumbering around the apartment, spraying the fire extinguisher. And then when he sees Don Granberry's character, Kopech, the very clearly insane firebug, he's like, who are you? What are you doing here? And like, it's incredible.
He's the one cop in the building, and he keeps getting beset with all of these problems. Like, there's a woman like who's going into labor in the staircase, and then he just like, people are like, "You have to help us. You have to help us." He's like, "Well, all right, just wait here. We'll get a ladder or something. I'll be right back." And just another element is performance and the portrayal of the NYPD in this movie. I don't know if it was like the late 70s or whatever, but like some of the biggest mustaches I've ever seen outside of a Tom of Finland drawing for men in uniform. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And the other funny thing is, like, Jim Mitchum is such a funny performance because, like, I'd never seen Jim Mitchum in a movie before, but he looks identical to his father, but has zero of the charisma or, like, you know, style or, like, anything. He's just, like... ultimate knockoff brand Robert Mitchum. He's like, with like absolutely none of the talent.
He's like the pod person version of Mitchum, basically. Yeah, just devoid of charisma entirely.
Well,
yeah.
If I may make a brief Mitchum digression,
Please do.
If we could start the Mitchum digression segment, I looked into sort of Robert Mitchum's other awful sons who never succeeded in anything. And Chris Mitchum is another one. And Chris Mitchum, he ran in 1998, 2012, and 2014 as a Republican for the California State Assembly in the for California State Assembly, in 98, and the House of Representatives in the 24th Congressional District in 2012 and 2014. Attempting to unseat a Democratic, coming very close to unseating the Democratic incumbent named Lois Capps, who was named by a survey the nicest member of Congress in 2006.
She's resting on her laurels. Yeah. Get her out of there. Get Chris Mitchum in there. We need some new blood in D.C.
We need a guy
to drain the swamp.
Mitchum's going to clean this place up.
We need a guy he should make James Mitchum his chief of staff, just blundering into and out of rooms, not knowing what appropriations subcommittee he's on. It'd be great.
There's a really funny scene in the opening scene of Blackout where like it's like before you know Jim Mitchum is a cop, it's like him and his wife are walking along the street and they see this old lady get mugged and like her handbag is grabbed by some street thug, and then he just like he does the Seagal style run, like the very awkward, like jerky style of sprinting, and he tries to chase down this mugger, and then runs square into like a fucking. He runs square into a bunch of suits being put into a store, and then immediately gives up.
Yeah, and
he's just like he gets flummoxed by a rack of blazers, and he's like, "Wow, man, what am I doing here?"
And while he's on the ground, there's a very realistic performance by the guy wheeling the fucking blazer cart out, who's like, what the fuck, man? I'm trying to do my fucking job here. Like, what are you doing? Well, he's just like,
I think he literally says, He's like rolling around in the suit fucking jackets and pants, and the guy's just going, "I'm working here. I gotta work here. What are you doing?" And he never identifies himself as a cop. He's just some random asshole who just barreled into this poor schmuck.
To be fair,
on Canal Street or whatever.
At no point does the Jim Mitchum character, whatever his name in the film may be, actually identify himself as a cop. He's just I think he loses his jacket at some point, so he's just like blundering in and out of various rooms, just
shooting people.
Solving problems or making them worse. Yeah.
It's funny because like Robert Carradine's first brilliant crime idea is to steal the uniform of like the guys driving the paddy wagon so that he pretends to be a cop to gain access to people's homes to rob and torture them. But I mean, he has the right idea. When you're dressed like a cop, you identify yourself as such. That's sort of how it works.
So, yes. I mean, are we almost suggesting that the portrayal of New York as just it's a fundamentally like dysfunctional place, and no one is more dysfunctional than our hero, really.
Yeah, that's why I think it's a credible depiction of New York City.
Yeah. Do you remember there's also like the great building of tension moment where Jim Mitchum, having been effortlessly kidnapped and hogtied by Robert Carradine, is hooked up to like some wires that as soon as the power goes back on, we think saving the city from its plight at the hands of the Blackout gang will in fact electrocute him in a again a very cool scene, I think.
Yeah.
2 thumbs up to that scene.
2 thumbs up to that scene. What's your final verdict on Blackout?
I thought it was pretty good. I mean, honestly, like I was entertained by it. It had that good kind of like sleazy exploitation film quality to it. There were parts of it that were pretty funny, and like I like any movie that's kind of like a keyhole glimpse of like the apocalypse or just like the unraveling of society. And an apartment building is like a great vehicle for that.
You know, there was another. I mean, this is incredibly off topic, but one of my favorite of the Dead. I think probably one of my preferred of the Dead movies, Land of the Dead, is kind of the same thing. Just an apocalypse, but through the perspective of like the last luxury apartment building in America as it gets slowly overtaken by zombies, just because they wouldn't give John Leguizamo an apartment.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty much. They wouldn't let him in on the condo association. So the class warfare in Land of the Dead begins afresh. Just one last thing about Blackout. It has a great death scene when Robert Carradine dies at the end. He like tries to get away in a car, and like it's just one of those random movie things where a car like crashes and then immediately explodes, and he's like on fire. He's running towards Jim Mitchum on fire, and his last words are, "I'll kill you, you bastard!" Right before the flames just fully engulf him, and he just falls down in a pile of ash.
That kind of made it for me. Yeah. That scene kind of made it for me, and I half expected Mitchum to just unload into his flaming corpse, you know, like, but.
See, that was a Canadian touch. It was just a little polite. If in America, he would have said a one-liner and then dumped a clip into like his ashen body. So it was just a little polite. Yeah. It was just he's a bad guy, but that's the Canadian harsh way for anyone to go.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. You don't get the tax break if you're too mean about the film.
That's right.
Which is funny because there's a lot of astonishing acts of cruelty in this movie, like when Robert Carradine just shuts off that guy's breathing device right before he leaves the apartment for no reason.
Or just murdering a magician in front of his dog.
Oh, that was terrible. Poor French magician and his dog. Oh, man, if they had killed the dog, that would have been too much for me.
Yeah. Well, they're not Slate. Not Slate columnists. Will, you know, they have morals.
Yeah, exactly.
The last thing about, I mean, we've been done like 4 last things about Blackout. It's just there are so many things about this movie. Is that one of my biggest like pet peeves in film is when a character will be telegraphed to be a character is shown to be very good at what they're doing by telegraphing how bored they are with something exciting going on around them. What it's like if someone will be in a gun battle and then they'll sort of just like wander into it, do a quip, and then commit this act of incredible violence with ease. And I feel like the Jim Mitchum sleepwalking performance is like the other side of that, but I see basically like no difference between, I don't know, fucking Iron Man joking around with his friends while doing some kind of acrobatic alien fighting, and Jim Mitchum wandering into a burning apartment and then just sort of desultorily putting out the fires of the nearby flamethrower.
Yeah. His entire performance is like I think could be summed up as like low energy oaf, like not an entertaining oaf, but like a narcoticized oaf, like an oaf after like a really big turkey leg and like a whole barrel of mead.
I also love the scene where Ray Milland is like, inconsolable, looking at the, the mound of ashes that was his priceless art collection. He's like, it's irreplaceable, absolutely irreplaceable. And then oaf Jim Mitchum is just like, well, you still got your life, so you can keep collecting art if you want. There's more paintings out there.
Oh man!
You know what it was? I was trying to figure out who that character reminds me of. I'm gonna come back to Seinfeld. It's Mr. Pitt.
Oh shit! Yeah, absolutely.
This is how Mr. Pitt became who he was. This is Mr. Pitt's villain origin story. He was accosted by the Blackout gang, and that's why he's so weird about his Snickers bars.
Exactly, and after that's his wife left him after he callously was willing to sacrifice her life for $10,000. That's it.
But Will, she had grace.
Yes.
So Will, I think you accurately picked up on the connection between this film and Cronenberg's first movie. Cronenberg's first movie, Shivers, which they both kind of pull from that J.G. Ballard High Rise and the just ambient terror of other human beings that was sort of in the air in the 1970s.
Yeah, but it's a very middle class. It's like because all those movies like Death Wish or whatever or The Warriors are about like a middle class fear of like the urban poor. But like in this movie, it's like it only like outside the criminals themselves, it only features like the middle class.
Yeah.
And like with Shivers, it's like this very nice apartment building. It's about like sort of like disease and like social, like the body politic itself, like mutating and like sort of spinning into chaos, but in this like highly manicured, nice middle class existence. And like a lot of American films really never do that.
Yeah, no, it's true. And so the second movie we watched,
I was going to say even when American films do, even when American like some of the most notable examples of American films doing that are trying to like convey the same kind of message, right? Is something like I don't know, like the Hills Have Eyes, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or whatever. But in all those cases, the urban yuppies are out of their element. The criminals never come into. They're out of their element,
and it's always like they're never the butt of the joke.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike in this movie in Shivers, like the victims in this movie are really who's being satirized, not the vicious psychotic criminals who are abusing them.
Absolutely.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So bring back the tax breaks.
Yeah, exactly.
Therefore,
the second movie that we looked at from this era is actually Cronenberg's fourth film. Scanners. So he'd made at this point he'd made Shivers. He'd made Rabid, which in itself is kind of like an expanded remake of Shivers. I think you could argue in a lot of ways. And then
absolutely, it's the same theme of Shivers, but wrought on like society at large instead of just one discrete like apartment complex.
Yeah, I see Shivers and Rabid as kind of like his Day of the Dead or his Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead in a way. You know, like the action kind of expands.
The sex zombie movies.
Oh yeah. So Scanners was his fourth film. He made it after The Brood, which is a very disturbing film he made about his own divorce. But Scanners, he'd had early financial success, not necessarily critical success with Shivers. And that movie did win. It won a bunch of awards in Europe, but wasn't really sort of critically acclaimed in Canada, and we'll get to that a little later. But so by 1981, the tax shelter thing is in full swing, and Scanners is made. The production starts when it's half written, because the way this process works is there is available money. You got to go in and pitch the doctors and the dentists and the businessmen, and then you have to make the movie real quick. So. Scanners started production as like really just a treatment, and it was originally titled The Sensitives. The alternate title for it was Telepathy 2000, which is which kind of tells you like where they were at the script process,
I want to live in the alternate universe where we're talking about Telepathy 2000. That sounds very fun to me.
According to the producer, the shoot was quote unquote torture. And that was compounded by the fact that one of the stars, Jennifer O'Neill, did not read the script before agreeing to shoot the film and did not realize it was a horror movie. So according to the producer, the Scanners' original script had what he says, many, many exploding heads. And O'Neill threatened to walk off unless that number was, quote, greatly reduced.
Well, you know what, though? But the one that we're left with is so memorable and perfect that it's hard to imagine if they had thrown in a couple more exploding heads. I mean, the effect of that one head explosion would be a little bit degraded.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's it would be less like it would absolutely be a less iconic moment.
Apparently, they reached that. They figured out how to get the exploding head just right by taking months of practice work at a unheated Montreal warehouse, and the final key was this really frustrated practical effects technician just put a shotgun underneath the prosthetic and pulled the trigger, and they were like, "Ah."
That's awesome. It works so beautifully.
So Will, do you want to walk us through Scanners?
Well, I mean, Scanners is, man, it's like if only like the nation of Panama could just exist to mint future David Cronenbergs, I'd have no problem with their, tax shelter policy. But, Scanners is like a masterpiece in my opinion. And like it's the fourth movie. It's like definitely the most, sort of accessible of Cronenberg's early films, of like an unbroken hot streak of, like you mentioned, those first three, and then going right into Scanners, which is, I think was probably his most successful movie to date. But like, I honestly, like rewatching it, it really reminds, like, it has all the makings of like a proto superhero film.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
The Scanners really are kind of superheroes, but because it's Cronenberg, it has like the same kind of, it's some kind of like a sort of adolescent power fantasy where, like, you're just this like loser nobody like Stephen Lack. And then you realize, like, oh, wait a second, I'm a scanner and I can do it all. Mm-hmm. I can do it all with my brain. And you're talking like, cyberpunk shit, like hacking consec through the fucking like a public payphone where the nervous system of your brain like fucking like interfaces directly with a computer system to like hack it. That scene is incredible. And then just like, like telepathy amazing. To like kill people with your mind, make them do things. Like it's just like pure mental powers. But like, because it's Cronenberg, it has that sort of adolescent power fulfillment fantasy, but undercut by like this horrible biological toll that it takes on you. That like the exercising these powers wreaks such a toll on your body itself. And like the incredible last scene of the movie, where like all their veins burst and they catch on fire. It's just, it's really creepy, like inhuman thing where like the exercise of these powers doesn't come with like cost free, so that's what I really enjoy about Scanners. And like the other thing we mentioned in the earlier, this kind of vague feel of like North America, where like if you're an American watching this movie, like everyone appears as American, like you could believe they're American, but because it's filmed in Montreal, it has this like weird like otherworldly quality to it. Like it's not Europe, but it's not quite America either, and it has this weird kind of like sort of like uncanny valley effect in terms of like the environment that it depicts.
I was going to say, like a lot of those shots, like especially the phone hacking scene is, there's this area outside of downtown Montreal on the way to the airport that still looks like that. And Cronenberg did such a good job of sort of capturing this Billardian, like mixed use industrial business netherworld of
office parks, and
techno parks. Like every time I drive by there, I can only think of Cronenberg, like he really captured it better than anyone else.
It's this contrast, like in Shivers, between this like very sterile kind of modern architecture and interiors with like the disgusting, the fluids and inner workings of like the meat factory that is the human body, like exploding itself or inverting itself or just spilling out into the world.
Yes.
I mean, you talk of Montreal, but even there's less Toronto in it. There is still some sort of bits that I get, like the meeting between Revik and the security chief that takes place in a station in the Toronto subway that was built like for a mall, and that it looks exactly like that still today. Like you can walk through that subway station and it is identical. But I think I wonder, right, again, like talking of these sort of, almost like, grotesque sort of peri-urban environments, shopping malls, business parks. I wonder if it's sort of no coincidence as well, like that he was like, yes, we're going to pick the subway station built for the mall as where the two meet and cook up their sort of evil plan.
So yeah, essentially, like, Scanners is kind of a superhero movie. It's about a guy who discovers that he has sort of superhuman powers and abilities, called scanning, which is like, like it's a highly powerful form of telepathy that if you master, it gives you basically limitless control over other human beings. But of course, there are other scanners. And, the main character, Stephen Lack, is inducted into the world of being a scanner by, this sort of shady pseudo-government scientist played by the great Patrick McGowan. Yes. And then, of course, but they're like the scanners, the abilities of scanners and the existence of them are sort of known and controlled by this, shady, semi-private public defense contractor called CONSEC. And they want to use scanners for their own purposes, but there's a scanner rebellion out there led by the god Daryl Revick, played by immaculately one of the best horror movie villain performances, aka not really the villain of the movie, actually the hero, Michael Ironside.
It's so good,
it's just
man.
So unforgettable in this movie as the villain. It makes up for the rather lackluster performance of the main character.
Yeah, I think it totally works, actually, that the Cameron Vale character, Stephen Lack's portrayal of Cameron Vale is so hollow and wooden. It just gives space for Ironside to come in and just dominate, I
mean, you even talk about the superhero, about this as almost a proto-superhero movie. I mean, a superhero movie loves to have a kind of, just like a sort of a tabula rasa main character, just like someone who's sort of just there to be projected on. But because it's a horror superhero movie, I guess it also just means, as you say, that Michael Ironside just becomes sort of the much more the kind of focus of in the center of attention, rather than your power fantasy about being Cameron Vale.
Yeah, because and also what I really appreciate about this, sort of as a superhero movie, is that I like the idea that if people with these powers existed, they would, if they're allowed to live at all, it will certainly be under the aegis and thumb of some fucking evil corporation like CONSEC,
yes,
who wants to use them. And the existence of any scanner outside of this apparatus is, of course, a threat. And what Cameron Vale finds out is that Daryl Revick and his sort of revolution that he's leading is we surpass normal human beings in every fucking regard. So why should they have power over us? But for him and his sort of scanner revolution, any scanner that's not down for the cause needs to be killed, because the only real threat to a scanner is another more powerful scanner.
That's
so
right.
if you're not on board with Revick's revolution, he's taking you out.
Yes.
And also I was just going to say sort of to sort of all of these points. I wrote down a quote, actually, from the beginning. Dr. Ruth says to Vale, which is, "You are 35 years old, but why are you such a derelict, a piece of human garbage? It is because you are a scanner. It has been the source of all your misery, but I can show you it can be a source of great power." And again, that really seems to be speaking to, again, these very same, these, not just the power fantasy as well, but the the power dynamic as it's eventually played out between, Revick and Vale, where they're sort of burning each other up, where it burns him up, they all burn because of this this great power, because it stays a source of misery in effect. I don't know. I gotta say, I really appreciated this film.
Yeah.
Scanners is it's a masterpiece. This is a five-bagger for me. This is one of the best horror, action, sci-fi movies. It's a sort of a blend of all three of those genres. But man, oh man, does it fucking hit!
Yeah, and it's you could feel him gearing up for Videodrome in this film too. And watching it for the fourth or fifth time now, when I watched it recently, one thing that struck me was, it's definitely informed by all the revelations about MK Ultra that were coming out in Montreal at that time. That undercurrent is there. We did an episode early on with Michael Judge about the Allen Memorial Institute here and the CIA's brainwashing program that they were running.
Oh, the equivalent is called the Crane Psychiatric Institute. That's where Daryl has trepanned himself.
Yes.
Yeah. What's so dope is especially in early Cronenberg movies, his very his most Canadian movies, the source of I won't say evil, but the source of horror is always like located in some sort of shady institute.
Yes.
Or like semi-public private corporation. It's all, it's like there's something psychiatric center, Consec. It's just all of these sort of like bland windowless buildings, and they're like manicured office parks, or like these psychiatric or academic or like organizations that have weird funding. It's extremely MK Ultra.
I almost want to ask, in that it's sort of in the context of all of this, then, I mean, because you also have the hippie scanners, right? You have the you have on the what you have the government control or government adjacent Consec with its manicured office buildings. You have the you might say violent revolutionary in the form of Revok, but then you have the in the form of what's his name, Ben Pierce, the artist with sort of his scanner friends who sort of and the hippie scanners who try to meld their powers into one and just like enjoy what appears to be a telekinetic orgy that gets busted up by some guys with shotguns. That's actually a huge call. That's a huge call, Riley, because that split between Revok's camp and the painters' camp sort of illustrates the sort of decay of the leftist movement in the 70s, where, you know, you've got violent revolutionaries on one hand, and then on the other hand, you've got people doing like what's basically like an amped up be-in to sort of do self-improvement. And of course, Riley, in Cronenberg's lens, the hippies are punished by, you know, they're all basically murdered.
They're wiped out.
They're liquidated.
You mentioned... Riley, you mentioned the artist character, Benjamin Pierce. I got to give a shout out to the actor who plays him, Robert A. Silverman, who is sort of like a Cronenberg stock character. He's just like the go-to weirdo, which, you know, if it's a Cronenberg movie, you got to have one of those. But he was in The Brood, he's in Existence, and he's in Naked Lunch as well. And I think at least one or two other Cronenberg movies as well. But I always love seeing that guy show up. And he's one of those guys that I only ever see him in Cronenberg movies. Like, I don't think I can name another movie he's been in.
He's got an incredible face, you know, for Cronenberg to play with.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you're the weirdo in a Cronenberg film, you have put all your points in. We have Specht as a weirdo.
It's just funny because Cronenberg himself would become like the weirdo in several other people's films.
Yeah, absolutely.
Also, as you said,
most recently, Star Trek Discovery.
Yes.
Also, Naked Lunch, punchline of one of my favorite Simpsons jokes, where they sneak into the R-rated movie.
I can think of at least two things wrong with that movie. Yeah.
But I digress.
So, Scanners, we could all agree, Scanners, great success, amazing product of this tax shelter system. Just like, for me, 10 out of 10, would watch again. Yeah. You are the Scanners. You are the lock of the week from the Bottleman. You heard it here first. But, you know, so, like, not everyone domestically was in love with David Cronenberg's nihilistic vision of the future present. And
Dan,
one of
you suggesting to me that some kind of Ontario-based sort of social milieu might not have appreciated having its monocle dropped into a bowl of soup?
Hard to believe, but yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So that an early and vocal critic of Cronenberg was this Canadian journalist, Robert Fulford, who's been described as, quote, on the more conservative side of the liberal spectrum, which is very, very true. He's written a bunch of books. More than a few of them are about the city of Toronto. And in the 1970s, he was the editor-in-chief of a general interest magazine called Saturday Night, where he cowardly wrote film criticism under a pseudonym, Marshall Delaney. And in 1975, writing as Delaney, he published a full frontal attack on Cronenberg's first film, on Shivers, which we talked about. The article was titled, "You Should Know How Bad This Movie Is. After All, You Paid for It." Oh boy! And I found this article. I dug it up. It took me a couple of days to find it, but I found it, and I want to read you guys some of Fulford, aka Marshall Delaney, some of his criticism of Cronenberg and Shivers in general. So
I'm going to enjoy this.
It begins, and Will, you might recognize this tone from some American op-ed writers that you guys frequently criticize on your podcast. There's a through line here. So it begins: if using public money to produce films like The Parasite Murders, which is what Shivers was originally titled, is the only way that English Canada can have a film industry, then perhaps English Canada should not have a film industry.
Yes, and that certainly didn't come true.
Yeah. One should say,
Yeah.
I love that. I love that he's trying to strangle in the crib the career of the guy who is bar none the single most celebrated and respected Canadian film director of all time.
well, not just him, because he goes on to say, one should say it straight out: The Parasite Murders, written and directed by David Cronenberg and produced by Ivan Reitman, who we've established would go on to produce the highest grossing Canadian film of all time. Until Bon Cop, Bad Cop, and Ghostbusters. So The Parasite Murders, written and directed by David Cronenberg and produced by Ivan Reitman with $70,000 of Canadian taxpayer money, is an atrocity. It is a disgrace to everyone connected with it, including the taxpayers. The question it raises is an old one now, but The Parasite Murders brings it to life again. Should we subsidize junk, or worse than junk, in order to create a quote-unquote industry that will also possibly produce indigenous and valuable feature films? This is the opening salvo.
Yeah. And given what ended up happening to the Canadian film industry, Fulford more or less got his wish.
Yeah.
We more or less stopped doing anything until Bon Cop, Bad Cop, basically. Which listeners of this podcast will remember, we subjected CJ from Eat Chain to and caused him to lose some sanity points because it is a piece of shit.
It sure is. And the sequel is even worse.
But that's like this is so 1970s Ontario, right? Because Ontario's whole thing was that it is the sort of upright Anglican, very Anglo, a lot of United Empire loyalists, people who wanted the U.S. to remain a British colony, descendants of United Empire loyalists, basically, who were super, super conservative. My mom, when she was in university, she worked as a bartender, and the laws governing fun were so intense that you would get a ticket from the police if you stood up from a table while holding a beer. Yeah.
Oh, the no fun zone.
Yeah.
Got it.
Ontario was it was Toronto. It was Toronto's name throughout Canada was Toronto the Good, and it was a disparaging name because it was this just very prim, waspy city that was prime to have its monocle ejected into some soup by directors who were going to rattle some cages. And the problem is, right, those people kind of kept just getting their wish about the direction of the culture of Canada. And, we, or at least in terms of the stuff that gets funded or the big stuff that gets made here, it's either as an American backlot or it just it never has the kind of size, ambition, sort of scale or weirdness like the early Cronenberg films. And it goes to show, right? Cronenberg basically graduates to being a sort of American director.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't stop being Canadian, but he just becomes a Hollywood director. We do not get an indigenous.
His movies don't have that unmistakably Canadian feel that his first handful of movies did. He still films all his movies in Canada, and I think he still makes money. I think he still makes movie with money from the Canadian government. I think
he does.
These first four that we're talking about are just so unmistakably Canadian that they do represent something yes, indigenous to Canada. I will say though about this guy who wanted to stop his career before it started. I think it's just between Shivers, Rabid, and The Brood. Cronenberg was giving up the game on how op-ed writers are actually created. Like, how do you like literally? I mean, they're certainly not born these sex-obsessed freaks. They bud off of other columnists, as we see in The End of the Brood, where it's sort of you project all of your negative emotions and sexual pathologies into like a physical form, and then it just sort of sprouts off of your midsection.
Yes,
and then it's Ross Douthat, everybody.
Yeah, so you've got Fulford as like sort of the brood mother at Saturday night, and then you have these little homunculuses at, say, the Ottawa Citizen.
Exactly.
So I read through a lot of like era specific criticism of Cronenberg's early work, and what you're saying, Will, is absolutely accurate. After this Fulford article, there are sort of sound-alike articles coming out all across the country until after Scanners, rather, and then very much after like the Dead Zone. Cronenberg became too much of a thing for people to ignore. So you had this weird period of his career where his films were getting panned by, capital C critics, but these same newspapers were also dutifully doing like 3 or 4 page interviews with him because he's, at the time, probably the most recognizable Canadian director, and he's getting offered shit like Empire Strikes Back or Top Gun,
God, I would give anything to see Cronenberg's version of a Star Wars movie. I mean, maybe I wouldn't want to see that, but man, oh man, I think he was offered Total Recall too. I think.
That's right. So it was.
They were going to do a version of Total Recall with William Hurt.
Yep.
Instead of Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Total Recall, Top Gun, Empire Strikes Back, and Flashdance. And like for me, the missing Cronenberg want to see movie is Top Gun, because I want to see Maverick and Goose. Just like enmeshed in biomechanical tubing going down in flames into the ocean, like
I think Cronenberg doing Top Gun would slowly become indistinguishable from the film adaptation of the book Blind Sight. It was just immediately like you would become enmeshed in an organic network with your jet. Goose's death scene would be much more drawn out.
It's the modification of the human body through technology. That's what Top Gun is about.
That's right. So
wait, so is the Empire Strikes Back? Wait, so is Flashdance? What the hell?
What's going on? This is the cyberpunk future past we could have had. So, but yeah.
If only for not for the terrible Fulford clan.
Yes. So in
and his various awful spawn.
I was going to say, in doing research for this, I found out that the Fulford family legacy of like fussy scolding has been kept alive by his daughter, Sarah, who is the editor-in-chief of...
she's awful.
One of the most hateable publications in North America, Toronto Life, a magazine that seems to survive entirely on like hate clicks or as a resource for identifying class enemies.
It's a spite magazine.
It is a spite magazine, and I think the most repellent thing that Fulford's daughter published was a Toronto Life article from 2017 entitled "We Bought a Crack House."
Yeah, I don't know if this one made it sound. Again, I feel like a lot of our awful columnists could really make it big if Americans would just like pay attention to them. But the problem is, like, if Americans read "We Bought a Crack House" by Sarah Fulford, then like she would just become an American op-ed columnist, and then it would fall to Canadians to point out that actually she's Canadian. But the sort of the whole story of this was that like there's like this long Quillette length article. It's like 10,000 words or whatever, of this family that purchases and this is sort of in the early 2010s, a house in a very trendy Toronto neighborhood called Parkdale, which was sort of known for it has a high population of renters. It also has like a lot of cool businesses and artists, but also notably was the site of a sort of social experiment done by the Canadian government in the 70s, where like the local like a mental institution in the area was just emptied onto the streets to see if people would naturally reintegrate into society sort of organically without the intervention of any other institution.
They looked at Reagan's San Francisco project and were like, that looks good. We should try that here.
Yeah. And so it's got this, like, it has a history of being somewhat down at heel, but is, this, like, sort of this neighborhood. And it has, like, it's like ground zero, basically, for Toronto gentrification. It was, like, the first big gentrification place. And because, like, real estate in Canada is, like, as we sort of talked about in another episode of this show, it's like we had the same kind of financial crisis and bailout, but it was all disguised, done technocratically and without any politics. And so no one noticed. And so all the real estate prices just kept marching up, like, without a blip. And so what we get is people sort of slowly getting priced out of this area. And so this article in Toronto Life is written where this, like, family purchases a house for like $500,000, having never seen it before, and then goes to sort of take possession of it and find that it is occupied by several people because it was being used as like a rooming house.
Yes, SROs, basically.
And the whole article is them basically sort of, again, just like Monocle falls into Bowl of Soup, where they're like when we smell drugs coming from the other room, and this man sort of stroking his fearsome looking dogs, just staring at us. Well, basically, they're like, we were just trying to kick them out of their home, and they weren't courteous to us. We paid good money for it. And like halfway through the article, they're like, luckily, we still owned a nearby condo, but it was only 900 square feet. How could we fit our family of 3 in there? And
just could someone please just stuff a sex slug down these people's throat?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like on and on it goes to be like, again, like these people just, and quite justly so, getting fleeced by crooked contractor after crooked contractor, to which I say, good. And eventually, that it ends with a triumphant set of photos of them in like this, the identikit house that looks like it looks like one of the houses that the Queer Eye guy does, it's like
they've purged the bad elements, they've cleansed the house, and so
it now effectively looks like a doctor's waiting room. And they're like, thank goodness we were able to have this. We were able to add this to our portfolio of properties. And the people living in it, I assume, went on to, I don't know, win the lottery, die, whatever. I don't care. Fuck off. My house now. That was like the Toronto Life piece. It is certainly one that echoes around in my brain from time to time.
Those people should be funding the modern version of the Parasite murders and not displacing people from their homes.
Yes. Yes. This is the lesson of today's show.
Yes. We need...
Because, look, if you make it so you can write off 100% of the money that you invest in any sleazy exploitation film, then we'll get better movies.
Yeah, that's right. Right? Like the Canadian domestic film industry is basically limited now to Bon Cop, Bad Cop, and its sequels.
Yeah.
So, like, come on, please, anything. We need to bring, like... Springtime for Hitler, controversial, but you remember the songs. Like, we need to bring the producers back as the logic of our cultural economy.
Yes, and like what are the issues? And he doesn't come out and say it, but that Fulford has with Shivers, and that I think a lot of gatekeepers of Canadian culture have with art like this is they're looking for a way to run these government projects to promote and codify like a specifically Canadian style of art that represents Canadianness. They don't know what Canadianness is, but they have a vague idea of it.
And no one does.
Nobody does, because it's a fake ass country. And when
least of all Canadians.
Yes, and when what happens is by accident, Canada invents the slasher film genre, or in the case of Cronenberg, an entire genre of horror. These gatekeepers of culture look at what Canada produces as art and says, well, this isn't very Canadian. But it is. It's like,
because what's Canadian is whatever makes me feel good and whatever I can sort of think that will be respected by Americans.
Yeah.
Like, Canadianness exists purely in the mind of it exists purely in the mind of the individual as they compare themselves to America.
Yes.
Like that's how I see it, right? And they're like, oh, these slasher films aren't that respectable. I don't think we're being that impressive. We're not sort of showing ourselves to be the equal of our neighbor down south. We should be doing something more high-minded, something that will capture the sort of imagination of the writers of the New York Times or whatever, because they have this view that they have to elevate. There is, again, the pathology of Canadians is always that we must be elevated to the status of Americans. Mm-hmm. And so it's no sort of surprise that because of our need to like try to engage in, I don't know, essentially like dumping for our cultural industry, for like just subsidizing it all to hell and back, in order to like develop a culture that was sort of non-American, that was uniquely Canadian, that we ended up doing something like that, but that what we developed wasn't actually American, which is what we think of as good.
Yes.
And so we weren't able to tangle with it.
Hey, Canada, when 90% of your population lives within about 20 miles of the U.S. border, like, get over yourself about not being too American.
Yes, exactly.
It's America, but with a better healthcare system, and like part of it speaks French. Like, that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, the dystopian technopark outside of the city that is controlled by like a very opaque military industrial shady corporation, that to me speaks more of my experience as a Canadian than something like Bon Cop, Bad Cop 2.
Yeah. We don't like the vision of ourselves that's reflected back to us in the movies where we accidentally made good ones for a while.
Yeah. So R.I.P. the tax credit system. R.I.P. Canada making interesting and disgusting genre films. What have we learned today? Going through this era of creativity in Canadian cinema.
Well, I mean, like, just to reiterate my point, like, Panama, the country, should just be a filmmaking country now. And like, it can be a tax haven, but you can only get the tax haven status if you invest a good part of the money that you're seeking to shield from the U.S. government in producing genre exploitation films. And like, I think, like, if you're a rich person, like at least that money that you're not paying in taxes will go to create something that because it is just a tax write-off, and like it doesn't really matter whether it makes money or not. And in fact, it'd be preferable if it didn't make money, because then you'd be on the hook for that money to the government. You like, that is how good movies get made. Yeah. And like, I think like that mix of like just sort of people seeking to avoid taxes and just direct government subsidy is a good model for cultural production. Like for instance, like in the UK, oftentimes you'll see like before a movie starts, it'll be like made with funds from the National Lottery Commission. Like in New York, we have a fucking lottery to pay for public schools. Like, that's how fucked up America is, that we're like imposing a secondary system of taxation on like the most poor and vulnerable in our society, just so that we can have like, I don't know, heat in public school buildings. Where it's like, in a functioning society, you could have things like the lottery pay for movies, things that are not totally essential to the maintenance of civilization, but are nonetheless, it's kind of hard to have a good society without producing good movies. So I think that the tax system that you're talking about provides a model to be copied.
Yeah, and I think building on what Will is saying as well, there are right now a lot of the America's billionaires seem to be engaged in moronic spaceflight programs or multi-decade reputation washing schemes. I think we could all forgive Bill Gates for a lot more of his monopolism and stuff. And also the world would be a better place because he would try to stop like inventing a special kind of math for school kids to do if he would basically just take over for Cinepix and launder his reputation through the creation of genre exploitation films. I would think a lot more of him.
Let's get Guillermo del Toro's At the Mountains of Madness off the ground with SpaceX money. Come on, let's go. Let's
way more useful for humanity. All of the horrible, gruesome, almost unthinkable distortions of the human body are just going to be special effects, as opposed to in real life, which is what would happen if you tried to live in space.
Or all the circumcisions Bill Gates is responsible for. Let's talk about the real disgusting body horror.
Let's keep Shivers, stuff like Shivers, Scanners, and Event Horizon. Let's keep that in the realm of film and not reality. Let's
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, if you're a billionaire, like, just get involved in making movies, because if you make a bad movie, it's like not the end of the world. Instead of like, getting involved in taking over the education system of the United States and the world. It's like sort of the stakes are just a little bit higher. And I would prefer it if you not have a say in how kids are educated or how medical care is dispersed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if all of you if the Irving family is listening, we all would like you to please make the extended Scanners cinematic universe. Thank you.
Yes, please. All right. Well, Will, thank you very much for joining us on this journey.
Always a joy, and thanks for sharing Blackout with me, a film I surely would never have seen were it not for this podcast.
Yeah, it has been. I too would never have seen Blackout. I'm also very grateful to Dan for coming up with this idea. So I also could have understood that there is not only one Mitchum in the acting game.
Yeah, no, being introduced to the career of Mitchum Failson.
Multiple Mitchums.
Jim Mitchum.
I'm seeing double here. 4 Mitchums.
4 Mitchums. Well, thanks for listening, folks. This has been The Bottleman. Don't forget, if you want more of this goopy, transgressive content, you can subscribe to us on Patreon and get the true mind blast, the real scan.
That's right. I think we should definitely just we should, in addition to watching Corner Gas and Bad CanCon, we should watch more genre exploitation films. I really enjoyed them.
Yeah, I think we should do My Bloody Valentine next. It's fantastic.
Yes, we will do My Bloody Valentine next, and we should do it on the Patreon. Will, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to watch a couple of films and talk about them with us. I have had a blast.
It's all I do.
Indeed. And
it's no work to me.
And don't forget, we've got a Patreon, $7 Canadian a month for a second episode every week, which you can subscribe to, for which I'm sure we will be watching more genre exploitation films in the future, such as possibly Death Weekend. So, with all that being said, thank you very much, and we'll see you in a couple of days. Bye.
Au revoir.